Hello, and welcome to OnSurviving. My name is Meagan, and I'm a survivor.
My name is Noblelee, and I am a survivor.
Together, we're bringing OnSurviving to the world because it matters.
It matters to me because alongside the potent fears of our frail hearts is so much hurt, loss, and trust issues that I've often had to navigate through all alone with very little resources and zero trust. I am passionate about doing this project because I get to tell my story and be that trusting person to be there and help with the resources that I never had and hopefully make a difference in people's process of surviving.
And it matters to me because I want others to recognize the deep strength and rich humanity involved in every step in the process of surviving the tragedies life brings many of us. I suffered silently and alone for too long, and I want to help others to find hope more quickly and readily and feel and be less alone in the process of surviving.
OnSurviving matters. You matter. We matter.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. It's great to be back, especially to talk about a topic that could be really positive, but it's also one that I myself really struggle with. We are talking about self-esteem and how that shows up in relationships with others, especially when we are struggling with our mental health. So this topic really came about because when Noblelee and I were talking about what to write, we thought we would really focus on that part about how how our self-esteem has that impact on whether we're having good relationships with other people. And then we ended up both talking about our self-esteem and how our negative sense of self got in the way in one way or another anyway. So in our discussion today, we want to focus in on that self-esteem part, our own sense of self, how it plays a role in how we show up with others, really, but mostly about how we can care for and build our sense of self in difficult times. So as always, we just want to remind you that we're talking about things that can, anything we're talking about along the way could be a trigger for somebody who's watching or listening. For those of you who are watching, I'm going to go ahead and share some crisis lines on the screen. We always encourage you to take care of yourself in whatever way is going to serve you best. And if you're kind of struggling for where to go or who to go to, there's a whole bunch of different crisis resources out there that we encourage you to take advantage of. It's confidential, it's free, anybody can access them. So please do. And of course, those numbers, at least the 988 number, hopefully that'll stick in your mind. But they're also on a lot of our videos on YouTube. So if you forget this, please feel free to go on and check that out as well.
Yes. So let's have our guests join us. Welcome, Nakia Winfield. Nakia is an anti-racism educator, a facilitator, a leadership coach, and an all-around amazing human being. So glad that you're here.
Oh, and I have to say special welcome, Nakia. It's been wonderful getting to know you over this past year, and just excited to have you here with us with whatever is on your heart to share today.
Thank you both for having me. I'm excited for this conversation and really honored that you thought to bring me on based on the short time that we've known each other and with a topic that's an important one like this. So thank you. I'm excited to jump in.
So we think our stories are really important. So I would love to hear your self-esteem story to get us started off. How do you think about yourself? And where does that sense of self come from?
Yeah, thank you. So this is a really interesting question. I actually really love this question, whether it's in the bounds of self-esteem or not. Um, I think that my sense of self really comes from defiance. So as I was growing up, I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, and so I was the only Black child in like 6 out of 7 of my classes my junior year, and it was only strange because of that one class where I was like, where did you all come from? And so there's a lot that when I began my journey and becoming a human and having a connection to myself, that was in defiance. Like, I'm going to do this because you say that I can't, right? I'm going to exist in these ways because you say that I can. And as I grew up, right, like more things came into play, but racism has been, and like my relationship to it has always been there, even in my understanding of gender and how I'm able to relate to it, right? So you can see that my pronouns say open, and I'm open to all pronouns as long as they're used with respect. But my understanding of what it means to be a woman was really informed by white supremacy ideals, right? And like the idea of women being delicate and white and blonde and small and quiet, which I was none of those things. And so even now that is still very much in play. But things that I have learned, or things that I have come into to love, is that my body is ride or die. Like, my heart is gonna beat, my stomach is gonna do what it does, right? My lungs are gonna breathe, even if I don't want to, right? Even if I'm like, I'm over it, like, let's just not, I wanna be done with everything. Like, it's still gonna be there. It's still gonna work for me because it doesn't know how not to. And so that has been a really lovely perspective on how I'm able to engage with my body, and think of it more as a partnership. And so I feel like that's a part of how I end up coming through for self-esteem as well. So being able to have a body connection. And then the last thing is, growing up under white supremacy culture is wild, but it means that the things that I was able to do to value myself in space were values that other people had, right? So like having intelligence and individualism, I was able to gain my value because of those things, right? Being very intelligent, being of service in a particular way. And so I had to get value from other people before I was able to feel like I could see value in myself. And then once that happened, I could see value in other parts instead of just these things that people had given to me. So I know that was kind of a long way around, but those are some of the ways that the stories about like how I have come into myself and how I interact in the world now.
Yeah, you triggered all of these thoughts. One, you reminded me, I love your body is ride or die comment. And I actually, it made me think of this morning. I was doing this like power yoga workout. It's this 20-minute practice that is part of a series I purchased on through Daily Ohm. Is either of you familiar with that? Yeah, no. It's a resource, by the way. I'm gonna just have to put it out on Facebook too, on our Facebook page, because I have found so many programs in it that have just boosted my sense of self, my orientation to the world. And it's on all sorts of things. I was actually kind of surprised to find exercise, because there were other things about meditation and whatnot. But anyway, I bought this class. Oh, the other great thing about it is that it's all sliding scale. So you get access to your class forever if, you could pay $19 for it, for most of the classes. That's how that's the low end of it. Or if you can pay the full price, it's $55. That's usually, and I just love that accessibility. Anyway, so I decided to do this course because I have my daughter's best friend is getting married next month. And I'm like, I don't have money to go buy something. So I got to, and she's going to have this fancy wedding. So I got to fit into a dress. Well, I don't fit into any of those dresses anymore. So I was like, maybe if I could just, do a little extra boost. Well, the instructor is all about you are exactly enough and exactly right as you are. And she talked about it as a partnership. And so anyway, great resource for thinking about entering and getting at your boosting your self-esteem in a whole bunch of different ways. DailyOhm.com. So anyway, thank you for that.
I'm definitely interested in that. So we'll get back to you on that one.
Well, you know what? I'll be happy to actually even post the class if you're interested in that. But it's worthwhile just scrolling through to find, whatever may be of interest to you. So I wasn't meaning to have a commercial for Daily Ohm, but there you go. It's a good resource. So coming back to the center of this conversation, I mentioned about how, in the opening here about how we were intending to write about one thing and ended up really focusing on self-esteem. Well, part of that was, it came up because Noblelee was having some difficulties with a friend who didn't understand the priorities that Noblelee needed to have in order to care for herself and others in trauma in her life, which I super relate to. And so we were just kind of about like, all right, how do we navigate that with other people? So when I got into it, I just couldn't help bumping up against this wall because I have heard so many times. I've had the privilege to work with some really amazing people like yourself, Nakia, who and I've every time, and the bold, amazing, confident people, and I have felt so often so scared and shy and small, and feeling like there's just this mountain of things to get over, right? So there was a long part of my life where I was pretty bold and confident too. And it feels like when my daughter died, it was just the last straw. And everything that came before it that could have beat me down stepped up to kick me some more. And from there on, it was just a real struggle for me to feel like I fit anywhere. So as I talked about in my written piece, that's where, I had done everything I could to try to numb myself in dealing with that trauma and everything else that decided to jump on board. And so I got, pretty severe alcoholism. And that's, those are the folks I felt comfortable around and felt the sense of belonging with were other addicts. And so I've just kind of tried that. I've really personally struggled with this idea is like, it feels so privileged sometimes to me to have a sense of self-esteem. And yet your story, Nakia, is really like flies in the face of that, right? That privilege story. So which is all the more reason you should be here to talk with us about this. So I'm just going to leave that there for the moment. And then let me ask you this. Do you think a negative sense of self or low self-esteem, like kind of necessarily gets in the way, or maybe it naturally gets in the way. I don't know. How do you think that shows up in considering how we might have relationships with other people who are healthy and who might support us in being healthier?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, right? And as you were talking, I was thinking about how humans don't naturally go, oh, I want to be like that person, but I can't because I'm so tiny or I'm so whatever. Like that's a behavior that I feel like we give children, right? Like there's this idea of like comparing, and then there's this idea of mimicking. And I find that when we are in healthy relationship, or when we are seeing healthy people who are not invested in making us feel small so that they can feel larger, then they are also invested in us being able to take up the space that we need to, right? So we're not comparing to somebody else and being like, oh, this is where I'm at a deficit because this person has so many things. It's like, oh, this person is kind of showing me how I can do that thing too, right? And I think that there's such a difference in how you're able to engage at that point, right? Like when you're engaging with, when you have a low self-esteem, or if you have been a victim of abuse, like predators can see that, right? Like they're like, oh, that one, I can do that. Like this is a familiar dynamic for this person, right? Like there are things that they can pick up on. Whereas when you're in a group of healthy people, they're like, that seems weird. Let's talk about that, right? Like, let's bring that to the surface because we think that that's a thing that's going to hinder you. And we don't want you to do that, right? Like, we don't want anybody in our group to feel that way, right? And so I think that it really depends on who it is that you're trying to be in relationship with. And I think that oftentimes when we have a low self-esteem, like we have it because of the people that we're around, right? Like we're getting messages from the world that tell us about who we are and how we are valued. And those messages or those value systems are often so limited, right? Like you're valued by being able to like perform patriarchy in a particular way, or perform ableism in a particular way. And if you're not, or classism, right? And if you're not able to meet those standards, then like, oh, well, it's because you aren't good enough, right? And so I think it really just depends on who we're trying to be in relationship with. And yeah, like, yeah, I feel like I'm repeating myself, so I'm just going to pause there.
Yeah. And Noblelee, I'm going to ask you to reflect with me here on this, because you and I are super close in age. Nakia, I don't know where we stand, in in relation to age, but I'm thinking about, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, oh, I wonder how it is for younger generations, because there's also so there's the individual, there's your small circle, right? People who are around you, and then there's the whole culture around you, kind of telling you how big or small it's okay to be, how much, how true to yourself it's okay to be, if it's okay to have emotions or not, if it's okay to crawl into your bed and stay there for a couple of days because you just need to, and I know for Noblelee and me, who are both of us, we've talked about before, so I'm not outing, right? That we're both just about 50, and growing up, it was just like having vulnerability, being vulnerable was not okay. And, having any kind of mental health challenges, being depressed, having anxiety, that was weakness. And the real, not just implied, but overt messages to conform. And oh my God, and I'm saying this as a middle-class white woman. I mean, I can, please. And how and how crushing that was for me. Like, I grew up with this mentality that that I should behave, perform, be a certain way, and somehow like lost, I think that coupled with the abuse and the fact that there was no support in recovering from that abuse, that all of that came to like a detachment from really a sense of self. And it's real hard to have positive self-esteem when you don't even really have a solid sense of who you are. So too many words. Noblelee.
Oh, that's that is also very true. I had major trauma from a very young age, and my older brother was murdered, and we were just little kids. And so my parents, and I was 3 years old, and I just knew that my parents couldn't love me like the way they were. They didn't hug on me and love on me, and they were always gone. And so that began my my thought process as a little toddler, that I'm not enough, that my parents don't want to love on me, because I didn't know why they were sad. I didn't know why, and then being compared, I have 3 sisters, and I would legitimately hear things like, well, you're not the pretty one, and you're certainly not the smart one, and so you're not the successful one. So what one are you? And it became like, I'm the tough one. So then I created this, I'm so tough, outer exterior, when I was just scared and broken, and I couldn't stand myself on the inside, totally uncomfortable in my own skin. But my dad was like, pretty little girls don't act like that in public. We were expected to be a certain way. The minute we left our property, we had to be, we couldn't act the way we naturally were. We couldn't be who. And so I just didn't even know who Noblelee was by the time I was a very young age. I didn't know who I even was, because I wasn't allowed to be my unique self, my real self. And so then that started in with the self-esteem, and we weren't allowed to. You couldn't say, well, like you had mentioned, we couldn't say I'm depressed, or I have anxiety, or I have a learning disability, or I might like a girls, forbid, or anything that you didn't say those things. You that was taboo, and so then all of that didn't help. So I too, like you, would never dream of like asking a popular kid if they wanted to hang out, or trying to put myself out there with a guy that was a football player or anything like that. I was not ever going to be good enough for any of that. I would hear things like, you're going to be knocked up and a dropout by the time you're 15. So college was never anything that would even, register for me. And where I did fit in was with the misfits, the bad kids, the troublemakers, and they made me feel I was cool, and so then I also took a path of addiction to mask some of these hurts and to fit in somewhere. And it just kind of kept going from there. And then with that came homelessness. And with homelessness, I got looked at everywhere I went. Like, you can't sit in the McDonald's. You go away. You're not allowed here. Go, everywhere I went. And everything just comes back to the self-esteem piece. I didn't ever have I never could dream past. I didn't have a big dream that I would be the chosen one, or I'd be the star of the show, or I'd be the one to do anything incredible. I didn't even lay there and dream those things. which is sad for a young kid, you know. So I don't know if that answered what you
Yeah,
were.
I mean, so in our generation, even coming from different places, we grew up in different places, we grew up in different cultural surrounding, and yet we heard a lot of that kind of same message woven through, and it feels like some things are changing. Like my friend sent me a whole bunch of TikTok clips of just these really empowering, awesome statements about, we are enough, and we, like all. So I'm curious about, if we are in fact, how prevalent that is, that we're doing better, and we're, continuing. And by the way, that's good for me too, because I feel like there's a community of people out there struggling with similar things, and it gives me the courage to do something different. So, I mean, we have some other questions for you, Nakia, but I'm curious if you have any insights on that. Yeah.
Noblelee, as you were telling your story, I was thinking about how we often think about the deficits that we have. And I feel like one of the things that I greatly appreciate about my family is it was full of strong women, who were very defiant, right? There was this proximity to maleness and proximity, like mimicking maleness in certain ways, but in this way where it's like, I'm going to have an asterisk by my name and you're not going to be able to put me in certain groups. So my Aunt Mignon was the first woman to work on the Alaskan oil fields, which I have a lot of mixed feelings about because I'm not here for big oil, right? But also, like, that was a huge deal, right? She's the first woman to like be working out there, and they had this idea that they were like, anything that could be done, like they could go and do it. Like it was not like, oh, just like go and do it, and it's totally fine. And that mindset was definitely one that I had as well, which has advantaged me greatly, right? And because of that idea of like having an asterisk, it was easier for me to have systems divestment, right? So like in all of the systems that I was engaged in, there was nothing that was for me, right? Like when I'm at school, right, and like dealing with racist students and racist teachers and a racist system, like, oh, these are things that are not for you. Like everything that was like joyous was not supposed to be for me. I also grew up with my family was full of strong women, and my mother was also very narcissistic. And there was a lot of enmeshment there, which was really difficult. But I, over time, got to be the golden child, right? And that golden child also gave me a certain sense of self-esteem, right? Because I am the favored one in the family. Like I am the one that is going to go the furthest with my education, with my success, whatever that happens to be, right? And so there was self-esteem with that, which was like a really awful self-esteem that was about othering and hierarchy, which I do not love. But it was there for me to be able to like use and navigate systems with, right? And so being able to go to college was like, I grew up on Madison's campus because my mom was the assistant director of the engineering summer program, right? So like I felt like campuses were mine. I had access to them and entitlement to them, right? In a way that is very advantageous for students who are going to go to a university, because Madison is a top 10 university, right? And so if I grew up there, like, oh, I can go to any of these places and it's totally fine, right? Like, sure, I'll go to your little like University of Washington or whatever, right? Like, it's just not a big deal. And so I I feel like there are these points where white supremacy was certainly like a huge driver, like a huge piece of like how I grew up. And also there were these other things that were deeply unhealthy as well, but like gave me legs up in particular ways, right? So like all that to say, I feel like the systems divestment, the idea of like, oh, these systems, like you are regularly telling me that you're not for me, that I don't belong to these systems, that I'm not good enough for these systems, that I'm never going to be good enough for these systems. Why do I want your systems? Like, fuck your systems, right? Like, okay, like these systems ain't going to serve me. They don't look like they're serving you very well either. So like, let me just roll out, right? And like, I think part of it was like the view of womanhood that I was offered outside of my small family was being of service, right? Like, oh, you just have to run after a man and care. Like, why would you do this? Like, this sounds terrible. Or I have to be very religious, or like a lot of respectability politics, none of which I was interested in. And I was like, that sounds like a terrible deal. I'm not interested in any of those things. And I think the younger generations are also like, really like, oh, we see your capitalism and we see that it's bullshit, like, right? And we see that you telling us that like the way that we are gonna like make it in the world is by spending a ton of money at college and then like sacrificing our lives to you. And that's dumb. Like you're firing people all the time. Like you don't actually care about us. And so I think that like there is a serious systems divestment, and I'm here for all of it. I'm here for all of it because it means that you can see those lies way easier. You can see them for being lies, and you can go, let me find my truth someplace else.
So do you think it's possible to have a good self-esteem when somebody has been through major trauma, especially childhood trauma, Nakia?
I do. And I think that it really, if they have been able to pick up somewhere, so actually, let me like even skip that part. So I don't know if you all know what Allied Media Conference is, but it's an amazing conference that's based out of Detroit. Adrienne Marie Brown helped to found it. It's usually put on every year. It wasn't this year, but super good. Afrofuturism, fabulous. So we put this on for that event, but we also did it for the Emergent Strategy Facilitation Workshop. So we took this idea of when you how am I going to explain this? So superheroes, right? Superheroes always have a backstory, right? They have a thing to get them to where they are. And the workshop was about reframing your traumatic backstory to be a superhero story, right? So like, what did you have to go through to be able to be like, okay, you know what? Nobody else is going through that again, right? And we were in Detroit when we did that workshop, and it was so powerful, right? And we used the X-Men as part of a framing, right? Like the X-Men are amazing. And I was like, okay, so they're out here, they're just trying to live life. They're helping everybody. They're saving lives. They're saving everybody's life, right? And then this Mike Pence man is like, these people are terrible and we should kill them. I was like, the X-Men are Black. They just out here trying to live, saving everybody else, right? And like, you all should die just because. I'm like, this is a thing, right? And so like, there's this idea of like, how can we see our backstory or as our traumatic history? How can we reframe that? And so I think that the question here is like, where are the pieces along the way? Like you might have had trauma, like everybody. I'm convinced that we are just like 17 maladaptive coping mechanisms in a trench coat. And that's what we consider to be our personality. And we're friends with people who are like, oh, you also dissociate? Me too, right? That's how we connect with people. And so like it is hard to be in this world and not have some level of trauma in these United States in late stage capitalism, right? But like, I think that how we frame that trauma, are we framing that trauma as like, this is all you can be, this is all you can expect, this is all that you can achieve? Or are we saying that like, this trauma is yours because of something that you did inside? Or are we saying like, this trauma is fucked, like the systems are doing this to us, you are not alone, right? Like we are all suffering under this, and this is what it looks like, right? Being able to have that lens and that understanding that like, this is not your fault, that this is somebody else's fault, right? Specifically, and that like, this isn't a unique situation that is specific to you, but like something that is external, right? And it means that you can be more at choice and more intentional of like, how you want to engage with it. And when you know that it's not yours, there is something that is just like very lifting about that, right? That's very freeing about it, where it's like, I'm not mad about being Black. I love being Black. It's racism that's the problem, right? Like, it's how other people are engaging in my Blackness that is the problem, right? The same with being queer. Love being queer. It's like anti-LGBTQ sentiment that's the problem, right? And so when we're able to like reframe it and like look at it that way, I think that there's a lot of things that are possible.
What about when people have been told like, you're not good enough, you're not likable, you're not valuable, you know, is it possible for them to come out of that with a positive sense of self, with some worth and some value, you know?
Yeah, I really think that it's about, are the people who are telling this people who are believable? Are they people who we believe? Are they people who overrule, like, are there other people who are telling us the opposite, right? And I will say that reading the books of like Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde, right? Reading Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Maree Brown, listening to Prentice Hemphill, right? There are so many stories, right? Which is why like racist and sexist and anti-queer folks are attacking libraries, right? Is because like that's where freedom comes from in a lot of different ways. But if we are able to even know a better way exists, we're like, oh, that person looks like me, and people are saying that they are beautiful, right? I think that there's a phrase that I absolutely hate, which is like, something along the lines of, you can't expect anybody else to love you until you love yourself, which is a bullshit phrase, right? It's a bullshit phrase. Like, you need other people's understanding of worth and value so many times to be able to figure out where you can have that worth and value. And so I think that like, if everyone is telling you like you're worthless, it's real fucking hard to be able to find another place that tells you something different, right? But if you are able to find those people, I think that there is a possible better way. And I will say that like, one of the things that really changed my self-esteem is my romantic partners. So my first romantic partner loved the ground that I walked on, like just absolutely adored me. Very, very lucky that way. One of my last romantic partners was tall and handsome and rich and from a rich family, and who was very smart and very likable, and also loved the ground that I walked on. And I engage in disruptive self-expression, which kept me in that relationship longer than I should have been. But part of me going through the world was being like, yeah, that's my boyfriend, and y'all don't think I'm supposed to have him, right? Like, I'm not supposed to have this person who has some serious attachment issues to me. And so I think that like, if you are able to be in places, if you are able to figure out a defiance, right? And be in it long enough to believe it, if you are able to find your people, and folks treating people who look like you and who act like you well, I think that there's possibility. But I will say that like, getting away from toxic folks who do nothing but tear you down is like incredibly important to be able to even begin that process.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really hard having partners. I was a survivor of domestic violence. And so for me, they either right after or right before they physically beat me, they would lay on the niceness, and so I got to a point where I don't trust these compliments. So when I did start hearing something positive, I'm like, nope, it's suspect. I don't trust it. I don't like it. It's not okay. So for me personally, I'll just say this really quick. I've lived the last 4.5 years with no partner, and it's been really lonely in times. But during this time, I've learned to love, not only love, but love on myself. Like physically like embrace myself and just like love on my hair, you know, the lovingness that you would want from a person, I've learned to give it to myself. And so now when people will say, you know, you're really smart, or you did a really good job today, Noblelee, or man, your hair's rocking it. I'm like, I know it is, huh? You know, but I had to do that for myself. And so I just really appreciated what you said, because I think that's key is changing your circle. You know, being around people that are going to build you up and that are going to make you feel the sense of worth that you've never felt, and it might be foreign to you, and you might be, you know, like shy like this at first, but the support system that I have now is people telling me the good things about me that I need to hear, you know, and then just as many times as you heard the negative and that you're nothing, you're hearing the other. And it's now finally for me, and all these years later, I'll be 50 years old in 10 months. It's the good stuff is starting to, I can almost cry because it's starting to erase the other. So
I love you, Noblelee. Go ahead, Go ahead, Nakia.
Oh no, I was gonna say I love that for you, right? Like that's the best, is starting to be able to get to the point where you can believe the good things about yourself. And one of the things that it sounds like you're doing is a thing that I call 6-year-old girling yourself, or 6-year-old childing yourself, right? Where you're like, oh, like if somebody came up and insulted me, I might be like, oh man, maybe I am worthless. But if somebody comes up and insults your 6-year-old child, you're like, that is not true, right? Like you're gonna fight somebody about those things, right? Like, and you're just gonna care for yourself differently, right? Like you might be able to go to bed on popcorn at 2 a.m., popcorn and vodka for dinner, right? But like you're not gonna do that to your 6-year-old child. Like your 6-year-old is gonna be like, we're gonna have some meat, we're gonna have some protein and some vegetables, and then bedtime is at a reasonable hour, and we're gonna turn off our computers like an hour before bed, and we're gonna brush, right? Like there's just gonna be structures that you're gonna put in place, and those are so important. And I love that, like you're like, when somebody's like, yeah, your hair looks great, right? Like for your 6 years, you're like, yes, it does look great. That's right. She's amazing. And yes, like so good. So good.
that is really true. I just say this came to mind too, is when I was first getting clean and sober off of drugs and alcohol in the treatment center, we had to do a whole lot of loving your inner child things. And one of they started it off with like writing your inner child self, your little girl self, a letter, and telling her all the things that, you know, that you wanted to tell her back then, and then, you know, doing all that. And it's true what you said, because I do want to heal the 49-year-old person, but I'm trying to heal the 3-year-old person and work my way up into this 49-year-old woman right now. But I'm loving on, you hit it when you said the 6-year-old girl, because I'm very much loving on that girl. And what I find is I could tell you all day how beautiful you are, how smart you are, how I'm glad I'm alive, that you're alive and that you're in my space. But then it couldn't do the same for myself. But starting with that little girl that needed to hear that, 46 years ago, I'm starting to be able to positive self-talk myself like that now. And that's a trip. That's real good stuff.
That's heaven. Yeah, I love the sparkly heart, especially. That was popping into my head as I have written down on a little note here from Brene Brown, she was talking about well, she's always talking about belonging, right? And vulnerability and all of that good stuff. But and what I wrote down was in reference to her talking about, yeah, it's important to belong to, something bigger than ourselves, right? These communities, hopefully like the chosen family, like Troy talked about, and you have talked about in encouraging to surround ourselves with those people who are going to help build us up, right? Nakia. But I love that she says, but it's also belonging is also the courage to stand alone and to belong to yourself above all else. That just blew my mind. Yeah, that, and I hear that's what you're doing, Noblelee. That when I listen to you, that's, I think, yeah, you're in that, is belonging to yourself. And frankly, I think you're ahead of me, but I think just right now, I feel like I've just stepped ahead, like 20 paces at least, inside myself, because it kind of clicked in. And I think there are still many of us too who struggle with the systems around us. And if we're in a job and we don't have like the employment mobility that some of us do, I have a lot of mobility and opportunity there. I know that is not true for everybody. And there was a time where actually in my field of work, and if I slipped up in that, or if I showed my vulnerability, it was made very clear to me that I would not work in that field any longer. And so I know, so I still have that in the back of my brain. And so it goes to this kind of scarcity way of thinking, right? Again, it's that kind of smallness. I like, oh, but this is what I have. And this is my support system. Even if they're really messed up, it's all I know. And so I'm like grasping onto it and trying to be okay with that. And realizing that, oh, there actually are so many more possibilities. And that is one thing I'm super grateful for younger generations showing me a million different possibilities that I had really limited my own thinking about. And I don't know if there actually are more possibilities now than there were 20 years ago. Maybe there are, maybe there aren't. But I do still think that there are many people who do still face those challenges. And so I'm kind of curious what I want to say, what I want to believe. And let me just check this with both of you. What I want to believe is that that's a sense of stuckness, but not a real stuckness, if that makes any sense. Like that, to reach out to those places that might help us have the courage to begin to make some of those changes, to find new places. Like, honestly, AA for me was a real starting place for me. For it was also happened, it came because I was at the lowest ever in my life. But it was also, I finally got to hear that I wasn't the only one dealing with stuff like this. And that isolation is just a killer, so, and then I got to hear, oh, you're amazing. And then I started looking at all these people who've suffered all this and think, oh my God, talk about this superhero thing. I'm like, every time I go into those rooms, I think I'm sitting in a room full of superheroes. I mean, that kind of resilience and strength and courage it takes to take those steps is just phenomenal to me. So checking that thinking.
I have so many thoughts. Going backwards, you were talking about being in a room full of amazing people. And I will say that one of the things that has helped me with my self-esteem, and I hope will continue to help others, is doing a stint at the Texas legislature and seeing people who have been bequeathed enormous amounts of power who are just rock dumb. I mean, just real ignorant about any and everything. Makes you really believe, like, oh, I could literally do that better. Like, I could start tomorrow and like be better at this thing than you are, right? I would just try a minute amount and get there, right? And so there is a thing where it's like, oh, no, I'm good. Like, I can do that. That's fine. But the other parts that you were talking about, right, were this sense of stuckness. And those are really real, right? So what we were talking about before is being able to leave an oppressive system so that you can start the process of healing, because it's real hard to heal when you are in that system, right? And I will say that one of the things I lean on real heavily is classism and intellectualism. I still lean on those things, right? Because like those are things that give me value in these systems. And while I'm still trying to like break those things down, right, they are still the things that are like protecting me in the meanwhile. So one of the things that's always been very important to me is that my home must feel very nice, right? Like, I want to be able to have lovely light. Like, I want it to be able to be a sanctuary, because this is the place where like those messages out there cannot come in here, right? Like, the art on my walls is affirming, the paint on my walls is affirming, the light that streams in is affirming, my decorations are affirming, right? Like, my kitchen is a place that like feels like love. It's important for me to be able to have a relationship with my house. And so when I don't have that, right, like when I'm living in a place that reminds me that somebody thinks that it's okay for folks to have black mold and terrible like architecture and all of those things, when I have to see those regularly, it really eats at me. Like, it messes me up in a way that feels really hard, right? Or when I was at a job that absolutely did not want me to be there, right? And let me know every day that, like, despite the fact that I was a top performer, that I was unwanted, that I wasn't good enough in some sort of way, right? They end up doing these like 360 reviews, so people can say like really awful things about me, but not have to have any attachment to reality, right? Like, so being in those places is honestly so torturous, right? It's hard for you to be able to feel like you've got anything good when you're hearing over and over and over and over and over and over again those words and those values, and people dealing in a currency that you are poor in, right? That's why I don't look at, for a very long time, I didn't watch or look at magazines. I didn't watch television, right? Because like there's a certain value set that is coming into my space and telling me about how I'm not good. No, we're not going to do that. Right. And so that feeling of stuckness, sometimes it is a feeling, right? Sometimes like there's a way that you can break out of it. And then sometimes like, when you're surrounded by it, like literally, unless you're able to break free, unless you're able to like resubmerge somewhere else and get like reoriented and recalibrated, it's so hard. It's so hard, at least for me, to be able to be in those situations and survive.
One thing that that did help me with my self-esteem is, excuse me, my drug and alcohol counselor would do role-playing activities with me, because I'd have a hard time saying no, and I had a hard time looking people in the face, because I was so beat down. And so I would say, yeah, I'll come over, and then build a resentment, all this stuff, instead of just saying, I can't. And so we would do these exercises, and she would be like, just working with me on how I talked about myself. Like, she just like, well, tell me something about yourself. And she just kept, doing different scenarios and work with me on different things, and how it's okay to say, I really don't want to tonight, but thank you for inviting me, and leaving it at that. You know what I mean? But as she's working, and she worked with me, she still does, but it's been like 4.5 years. But as she's working with me, I'm getting like more confident. I'm looking at you now. I'm feeling, I'm believing what I'm saying to you when you're telling me to tell you something about myself. You know what I mean? And it might sound really weird. And when she told me that, I'm like, yeah, right. I'm gonna role play self-esteem stuff with you. Okay, sure, pal. But I did it, and there really was something in that. Like, anyway, I just wanted to share that because it did teach me how to how to start feeling good and confident when I talk. So
I love that. I'm glad you piped up with that. And I think, we have a couple of like discrete questions that we put in that we wanted to get to. I'd say we just roll them all together and just keep going with this. Like, what is helpful? What can we do for ourselves? What can we do for each other? Whether it's family or friends or, an acquaintance at work, or whether it's, in our workplaces, in our public spaces, like what can we, because I just feel like we've already had some like gems coming out here. Let's just keep rolling those out, because one thing I will say before totally opening that, because as I was talking with my friend, because I realized I get so stuck in my mind about this. And she said, one thing I would say, let's see if I can find it. But she wanted she was encouraging us to reframe the questions, basically, that, I'm not going to find it, but basically she's saying, yes, of course it's possible. Of course. And of course, that doesn't mean that we're happy, happy, joy, joy all the time, right? I mean, it means having enough confidence to know that we need to be down for a while, and that that's okay. And that it had, that we don't, so and frankly, when we kind of, there's a process when you have been like some like really intense acute trauma, or a long-term societal kind of beating you down kind of thing. There's a process that for building ourselves up, and to give ourselves the grace in space to say, you don't have to be anything other than what you are right now. And to forgive yourself the stuff that you're beating yourself up for, and to go on. So that said, let's all lean into the possibility of and how we can do better by ourselves and each other.
Yeah, I love this question. One of the first things, so you had brought in a quote from Brene Brown. I don't know who this quote is from, but the quote is, never take criticism from somebody that you wouldn't take advice from. Right? Super helpful and important. Cuts out like 3/4 of the people who critique me. Right? More than that, right? Like, if you're not somebody who I'm looking to for mentorship, for like advice, like why? Like, no, you're not qualified to give me this feedback at all. Consciousness raising, right? Being around other people and learning about the circumstances that we're in, right? Being able to learn together with and from folks who are experiencing similar oppressions as you, while you learn about the natures of that, is also really important, right? It brings you connection, and it's also like a thing where like, oh, I'm seeing how this is messing me up, and again, this isn't mine, right? And so how can we do something different than that? And then I think being able to talk to yourself, like that self-talk, right? Whether you're a 6-year-old childing yourself, or like, there are things that sometimes you would say that we would never say to a friend. And so if I'm like, what would you say to a friend that was going through that same thing? And all of a sudden you can say the most lovely, supportive things, give great advice, right? Like write that down and then read it to yourself, right? Like figure out how you can make a mirror out of that. So those are the things that come up. Well, one more thing. There's an amazing book that I always shout out that's called The Politics of Trauma, by Stacey K. Haynes. That book is amazing and life-changing. It is deeply personal. You'll read it and be like, you don't know me. You don't know me. But she does. So again, being able to read about where you're at and like what's going on to be able to get another perspective, I think is always really helpful.
That just made me think of an earlier comment of yours, talking about the attacks on libraries, on the books that were banned or not, and I went immediately to, I was very isolated with my feelings as a kid, and really felt like shame, all sorts of shame around it, until I read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. And while vastly different life experiences, the essence of what she felt and experienced so matched mine. And I for the first time didn't feel alone. And I mean, I have very often said that Maya Angelou saved my life, because she had the courage to tell her story in this way that spoke to me. And like she saw me, but without, she saw the truth of her situation, and had the courage to tell that. And thank God she did. So, see, we get all plants there.
It happens. And personally for me, I thrive on recognition, of a job well done. It doesn't have to be, just anything small in my professional or personal, life. You did a good job. It goes so far, and it's so simple, and it costs nothing to do. You did a great job today. And then like a positivity sandwich. Even if I didn't do something great, let's start it off with something positive. Then we'll get to the thing I need to work on. And then let's end it with something else positive. And because if you don't do that, I'm just hearing, I'm not even, but if you started out with something positive, they're going to respond to that. I'm going to respond to that. And for instance, I work in a very large office setting. And right when you walk down the road that I'm in, there's people that gather up in this one cube, and it's gossip, it's negative talk, it's blah, blah, blah. Not me. I say good morning and I walk right past them, and I go to my own cube. And what I'm starting up in my cube is positive, uplifting affirmations. Like, my cube is going to be the one that you're going to want to be at. My cube is going to be so positive that you can't help but walk past that negative cube and find yourself right in mine, because I want to hear positive things at work around me. I want people building people up. I want women building women up, and so I thrive on a little bit of recognition. I was a lost child in my family dynamics. I never got a lot of good girls, good jobs. You're worth it. We're proud of you. Didn't happen. It was get good grades or I'm going to beat your ass. So it was like, okay, I didn't get the good grades. But anyway, just the way we talk in general to people is going to help with the self-esteem issues in the next generation to come. Like the way I talk to my little nieces and nephew. They're little kids. I talk to them so positive. And now I'm trying to teach myself, well, how about, they hear you now talking about yourself like that, the way that you're talking to them. And that's gonna really send it home. You know what I mean? And that's gonna help with this next generation. And another thing is a lot of times people will come at other people with what they did wrong. It's always what you did wrong. Okay, but I know I did something right, and so I just think that I've been really working on the way I talk to people and the way I talk around people. We are all in just a great big shared space. It's just a great big shared space. And so if more people could, I'm the most complicated person at the grocery store, in the drive-through window. It doesn't matter where I am. Hopefully if one other person that's being salty over whatever reason can jump suit, then this shared space that we all live in is going to look a lot more uplifting. So.
Yeah, here on that. It's funny. I was at a grocery store shortly after I moved here, and I was looking around, I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone seems so miserable. Everyone's looking down, just and like no one's talking to each other, just these figures floating around and all cranky. And I was checking out, and the clerk who was there like complimented one of my tattoos. And I was like, oh, and I perked up and I started talking to her all about it. And she's like, well, this is weird. People don't normally talk to me. Just that, yeah, that connection and positivity can have a lot of power. Which actually also kind of crosses over with one of the things that I was thinking about. I think this sense of isolation or sense of I'm the only one going through this, or right, is uh, um, that in and of itself. If it's just me, then there must be something wrong with me. There's something bad about me. So I want to really encourage people to talk about their stuff, to not be so closed about it, to really put it out there. And because the more people know and hear stories out there from someone that they work with or somebody, I mean, it doesn't have to, that it's not just the territory of therapy, right, in these isolated little boxes, then we can actually understand that we have this shared experience. And you know what, in that shared experience, we might actually find that there's something wrong with this society, with our systems, that need to be changed. So there's incredible value in speaking up, both I think for the individuals who will hear it, and then over time, and over more and more people, we begin to see that there's in fact not something wrong with us, and we can begin to work on some of those bigger changes. So that said, I think that we really, really need there's a whole lot of talk about there, like just what I'm saying here about willingness to be vulnerable and be vulnerable. And I called, I talked about Brene Brown's talk about the price of invulnerability. And I get that. And there is still price of vulnerability to some of us. It's part of the reason why I speak up so much, because I know that I can, my price isn't so high, right? And so the more of us that who don't have such a high price, please, please, please speak up, because I know it's not just me, who has gone through such horrible trauma and struggled on her own. I also want to say that our public officials, our employers, we should be working on making spaces where it's okay to be all sorts of human, and so that we can all have that sense that, in fact, we do belong. We all do belong in these public spaces, and we need to make sure people know that. And when we're hired onto someplace, we do belong there. And so, that's a whole other big conversation about how to create spaces that support belonging for all of us. But that's a big one. I think that each of us can have some hand in our families too, frankly. So we are, wow, I can't believe we are like, anybody have anything else you want to say? I think we've gotten the big stuff out there. Or are we ready to move into closing?
I just want to say one more thing real quick. I think that when we're talking about vulnerability, there's this idea that we need to be looking more towards collaboration and competition, right? If we are competing with other people, vulnerability is weakness. When we are collaborating with other people, vulnerability means like, oh, hey, there's a thing that I'm trying to shore up, right? Will you help me do this, right? How can we be in mutual accountability together? How can we see accountability as an opportunity to level up, as a love letter, right? And it's also going, hey, I've got these gaps over here. And like, I'm not going to be able to hold this part real well if X, Y, and Z happens, right? And I can help you with your gaps in the places where I don't have them, right? And so when we are coming together in a spirit of collaboration, it has to be safe, right? Because you don't want to collaborate with people who are trying to compete with you, because that's not going to be helpful for you, right? And so how can you make sure that you're in a place that's safe for collaboration? But when we think of our things along the lines of connection, I think it means that we have a different framework into our own vulnerability, into our own self-esteem and self-worth, and it makes a lot of things possible.
Yes. Nakia, I want to thank you so much for joining us. It has been so amazing to have you on here and just getting to know a little bit about your conversation or about your story and stuff. So we're going to close with a couple of announcements first. The first one is we're going to be back in 2 weeks. So our next discussion is going to be during National Suicide Prevention Month, or week, I'm sorry. And we've already wrote our articles for this topic. Basically, we'll be talking about what we have been learning about and how, what we can do to prevent suicide and and our thoughts on when you have thoughts on ending your lives and stuff. Sorry. I just got all tongue-tied there for a minute. Do you want to take over, Meagan? I'm sorry.
You're totally fine. Absolutely. We are a team. So yeah, we had talked before about how we're going to do these once a month, but we've got this one in 2 weeks because it's on during National Suicide Prevention Week. And so part of what we're going to talk about is, we've each done some training in different models of suicide prevention. And we're going to talk a little bit about how they would have worked or not worked, how they would have served us in the times, because we have both attempted to end our lives and thought about it seriously. And so we want to just talk about what that intervention might have looked like for us. And then with our guest, Melanie. And can you tell us a little bit about Melanie? She's the organization that she's with, Noblelee.
Yeah, Melanie works for an organization. It's called Chance, and it's all kinds of things. It's a day center for people that are houseless, and it helps with gas vouchers, and they run the motel program, which helps people that are houseless and in danger be able to stay in a motel room for a week from starting at a week up to 3 months. And they do lots of things, but Melanie has also had some attempts on her life, and she just is an all-around great human being. She knows how to work with people that are struggling with mental health issues and suicidal ideations, and just are down on their luck in general.
Yeah.
And she sees this, and she has some good things to add about what does help.
Yeah.
As a whole, with what she sees on a daily basis too.
Right. She's seeing it a lot there. So we'll talk with her about those strategies. And basically, there are a lot of opportunities out there to get trained, and we all can have a part in helping folks to see their value and to be here in this world. And so we'll hope that more folks will be interested in getting themselves prepared to help out when they see someone in need. So also, on another note, for October and beyond, we are talking with a couple of folks. We want to bring in some more just stories of survival. And so we're talking with some different folks who about coming on to share theirs. And we also want to invite you, or maybe someone that if there's someone that who would like to share their story, please do reach out to us, contact us through Facebook or through the Community Wisdom website if you are interested or if you have a suggestion. So really looking forward to that next series of conversations rooted in people's survival stories. Give us hope and see superheroes all around us. So, and now my favorite part of every one of these conversations, because it makes me giggle, we move into our the second of the two medicines, laughter, from Noblelee.
Well, I can't confirm nor deny if I told this joke last season, but it's appropriate for this. So what do you call a wolf who meditates?
Wolf who meditates. What?
And a werewolf.
I love it.
I just like it. I liked it.
Werewolf.
And a werewolf.
I feel like it's so appropriate that you told that joke on the full moon.
Oh, right.
Yes, it is a full moon.
Everything in its right place. All right. Well, with that, our first medicine, water, everybody.
Water.
Cheers to you. Thank you, Noblelee. Thank you, Nakia. Love you both.
Thank you guys so much. You're amazing. Love you too.
Good night, everybody.